So, all right. So, I think where we left off before we cut off was just kind of you talked to me a little bit before we came on here about you were a social scientist, really, to start with. And I was in the humanities too, with a history degree. So I wasn't a born writer or anything.
Right.
So our background kind of matches there. So if you want to kind of just enlighten everybody on how you came to writing and kind of what your background is and how you got to be where you are today.
Yeah, certainly. So I'm a social scientist by training. I have a PhD from Ohio State. And then I've been a long time academic I've been in schools of public health, schools of social work, schools of medicine, and I study alcohol abuse and how people drink in real time. So that's kind of my day job, or what I started out doing. And I wrote a lot during that, in that part of my career, but there are those boring science articles that are just,
Hmm.
they're no fun to write, and they're certainly no fun to read. Um, and so about a year or two ago, as I'm got about 3 or 4 more years before I retire. I've always wanted to do creative writing, so I decided I was going to start. And this about a year ago, this December of 22, or Thanksgiving of 22, I started writing short stories. I ended up kind of having to self teach myself. I don't
Hmm.
have an MFA. As an undergrad, I had an English minor, but you're going back to the 80s there.
Yeah, me
Don't
too,
remember.
though. Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
That may be the social scientist thing is to get a minor in English.
Yeah. That is, yeah. It's helpful, and
It
it always
is.
helped my writing as a scientist.
Hmm.
People go, "Oh, you're a good writer," but it was, totally different to
Hmm.
go into creative writing. So I did a lot of kind of, I wrote every day for several hours. I read every book I could get a hold of, watched master classes, and then at a certain point, I hired editors, a couple developmental editors to work with me, and that really kind of helped. And then it just started taking off from there.
Yeah. So are you from Ohio? Are you from the Midwest?
I have lived in Ohio twice. My
Hmm.
wife's from there. So I grew up in San Diego, and
Hmm.
then was in Ohio for graduate school. And then I was back in Ohio as a faculty member for several years. So
Okay.
two
One
stints
of,
there, and the rest out here.
yeah. Uh, One of my dearest professors that I had in college went to Ohio State, and as far as a writer, I think she had a pretty big influence on what I do with just trying to understand place and rurality and some of the things that I write about. And I talked to her the other day. I talk to her all the time. So there's good folks at the Ohio State University there.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a good place to go to school. It was a good place to live, and it was nice from a writing perspective. It gave me a totally different experience than I got in San Diego.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I kind of have two different cultures that I was able to, you know, live in for a while.
Yeah. So being, not a trained writer, you talked about that. So what is the process that you came up with? So how do you go about crafting your stories? How do you develop your stories? And then what's your writing process look like when you sit down to write a story?
Sure. So like I said, I pretty much write every day except maybe Sundays,
Hmm.
and just kind of give it a rest. But usually I get an idea for a story they seldom come fully baked. So, I'll have an opening, a setting, a conflict, or, one or two elements of it, and
Hmm.
I'll start writing. And I'll keep going as long as I feel like I have energy on that, good energy and a flow on that. And then if that kind of stalls, I'll set it aside and start working on something else. And so sometimes I'll shift between a flash story and a poem, or
Yeah.
a flash story and a creative nonfiction or something. But I always have a few things going at once. Occasionally, I think, and this is kind of, I think the stories I like the best are the ones that, for whatever reason, I just kind of wake up and I have it and it just
Yep.
comes,
Yeah.
and fall into a rhythm and just go. That probably happens about every fourth or fifth story. The rest of the time it's stops and starts and thinking about it for a while.
Yeah. See, you mentioned that earlier. You can put them aside and you can start something. I cannot do that. So on the last, I recorded one with Justin Lee earlier that'll come out in February, and we were talking about this same thing. And in during my MFA, we would have these discussions about what's your process and everything. And I coined this term exorcism writing, right? Like I get this story in me, and if it comes out all in once, like
Yeah.
it's probably going to be a good story. If I have to put it aside and go back to it, they tend to not come out as well as the way I want them to. Now, I did have one that I just finished that probably sat on my desktop for 3 months. I started out with a good idea, wrote the first scene, and then after the first scene, I didn't know where I wanted to go with it. I knew how I wanted it to end, and I knew what I wanted to happen, but I couldn't get the character there.
Right.
So it sat for a good while, and I think it was a prompt. I mean, it was just a writing prompt for a competition that I wanted to enter that drove me back to that story. And now that I've finished it, that's the only one I think I can say is that that's a good story after I did that. But I was that way with songs too. When you would write a song, if the song didn't come fully formed, I didn't ever really feel like it was a good one. And that really kind of bore out musically. And I think it does with me for short stories too. Novels, not so much. I can get a start and stop on that. But
Right.
again, if you sit too long, you're out of it, and you've got to go read your own novel again to get back to
Right.
where you were. Which you're going to do that 4, 5, 6, 7 times anyway. So who wants to do it more than you have to? So I've got a issue with that right now. I'm on the last chapter of a novel, and I need to brush up on where I was at the start to really finish it off. But that's interesting. And people like you that can do that, that's a talent. And you can move genres, right? Like you can go from poetry to creative nonfiction to fiction. So I had another question, but I'll jump there since we've kind of segued into that. Do you enjoy one more than the other?
I'd say, yeah, fiction for sure. I think
Hmm.
is my favorite thing to write, and I think it's so different than what I've been doing for 25 years writing science,
Hmm.
that it's just I'm still having a blast doing it. So as a matter of fact, I got when I first started, for the first several months, I'd paint myself into some corner and I would treat it like it was a research problem, and I'd be like, "Oh,
Hmm.
what do I do to get
Yeah.
out of it?" And then I remembered it's my story, just change it. It
Yeah.
was there was no rules to keeping me
Yeah.
there. So that took me a long time to kind of think that way. So I really enjoy that. Not surprisingly, given that, I probably don't enjoy or enjoy the least creative nonfiction.
Hmm.
Um, I just
Is
that
that due to just burnout?
yep.
You read so much. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Same for me.
Yeah, and it's hard for me to do it for some reason. I just that is always very rarely does that come out great. I've
Mhm.
written a couple short things that have come out fast that I'm happy with. But for the most part, it's dragging it drags. Poetry was it just kind of happened as a fluke. I never thought I would be a poet or write poetry. And it kind of came about when I got stuck on a flash piece or a drabble or something. And I was reading it. I was like, oh, this kind of reads like a prose poem. And so I started playing around with it. And then I started realizing it was a good way to kind of get ideas out or down.
Mhm.
And I've gone both directions where I've started with what I thought was going to be a poem that blew into a story and what I thought was going to be a story that ended up as a poem. So it seems to work for me, and I do enjoy writing them. They usually come out in one take and a couple line edits, and then
Yeah.
I don't mess with it. So
Poetry's hard for me. Not because I don't enjoy it. I mean, I do enjoy reading poetry. I think it's helpful for I think you and I were both in the same thread last night about that. How to
Yeah.
make your how to make dialogue sing, and David Joyce said read more poetry, and that was helpful because if you do, then you can kind of get that musicality of what the voice sounds like, what a cadence, how to create a cadence writing, and that's helpful. And I've got a cousin, and he's done well with it. He works at he works at SMU in the creative writing department there. He won the Porter Prize here in Arkansas, and it just comes to him easy.
Yeah.
And we had the same background growing up. His grandfather, I mean his dad and my grandfather are brothers, and it was just he that more appealed to him, and he got really good with that lyrical style of poetry, and I gravitated more toward stories. But the things that he can do, and the good poets can do, it's pretty amazing the rhythm that they can create and the little nuances that they can put in a line of poetry that can pull you in. And a lot of people, I think, are scared of poetry. And if you read something that's more, you know, I don't know, in your vein of life, right? Like
Right.
where you live, things. Because I read one of yours earlier, Junk Fish,
Yeah.
and that was because fishing and hunting that appears in your work, and we'll touch on that later.
Sure.
But that I liked that poem. Like I liked reading it. I got it. I got what you were trying to say, and I think it's because I could understand it.
Right.
Like
Right.
it was poetry that I could feel and I'd experienced, and I think if poetry can do that, then it goes a long way. And I'm not knocking, Ode to a Grecian Urn or anything like
Right.
that, but I don't have any kind of connection to a Grecian Urn, but I do junk fish, you know. I've caught a carp before, or a gar, you know. Uh, but that's a true talent to switch between the three, because creative nonfiction for me, I placed a piece in the Arkansas Review, and I don't really think I would call it creative nonfiction. It was more of an academic piece on Levon Helm and the band.
Uh-huh.
And of course, he's from Arkansas, and the Arkansas Review is always looking for stuff like that. And I had a
Right.
lot of fun doing that because it kind of melded creative nonfiction with historical writing and music. And I thought that was a good piece. But I've been trying to write one um, about a state championship basketball team here,
Right.
and it's just so much work to get everybody together, to get everybody interviewed, to keep track of all those notes, and then try to transcribe that in a way that's true enough that it's still entertaining, and
Yeah.
that's the tricky part with creative nonfiction, I think.
Yeah, for sure. I've written I wrote a story. We have a local kind of indie paper, San Diego Reader, and I wrote a story for them on bars that open at 6 in the morning. And
Yeah.
what was interesting there is I had enough background in it from my academic side that I didn't have to do a ton of research, but it
Hmm.
was really cool to approach it from more of a journalistic kind of approach. And so that one was really fun. Then they came back and asked me to do another one on distilleries, which I just kind of didn't have the same passion for, and that was like pulling teeth.
Yeah.
That was brutal. So I kind of get what you're saying.
So PhD wise, you mentioned alcohol, and you've intrigued me here. Uh, so are you an alcohologist? Is that what
Yeah,
you
yeah,
is that the
actually, that's
label? Okay.
yep, yeah,
Um,
yeah,
how big's that field?
tiny.
Yeah. I bet the
It's
conferences are kick ass though.
yeah, they're,
Yeah.
they're a lot of fun. No one drinks like alcohol researchers. Yeah, you'd think they might be dry, but they're not. But it's an interesting field in that it's super broad.
Mhm.
It it has attorneys, political scientists, sociologists, psychologists, biologists. So it's just all over the place. Matter of fact, a couple years ago, an English professor from USC, where I currently work, came and was doing a historical essay on drinking and asked me, for a bunch of resources. So, I think it cuts across kind of everything.
Yeah. Especially in this lifestyle. I mean, I
Yeah.
think it
Yeah.
goes hand in hand with a lot of the big riders, and I think I would say the riders that don't drink are probably in the minority because it's such a, don't want to use the word lonely, but it's solitary.
Right.
Right. And I think if you're not in a good mindset, you could slip there pretty easy. But I mean, it seems to be so intertwined with what we do and the people that we admire and read and want to emulate. So when I read that on your page, I thought that's the coolest thing ever to have a PhD in alcohol.
Yeah.
I mean, I felt that way in grad school
Yeah.
at some point. I think we've all been there.
Yeah. Yeah, for
so,
sure.
so
I get people like, you made that up. No, no, it's a real thing.
yeah. So, well, I mean, we could talk. I mean, that's obviously influenced your work, but we can talk about influences now. I could make a really bad pun about being under the influence, but I won't do it.
Yeah.
So, who's influenced you the most, or what has influenced you the most? I've got some ideas just from reading your stuff, but I'd be interested to see what you say.
Sure. And I will say it's kind of shifted, right?
Hmm.
Because when I came into this, I didn't know a lot of the indie kind of writers or that whole scene. And so getting exposed to all that is just kind of like that's been a joy too, just to kind of dig into that. So, but I would say in terms of people that I read, since high school, the early hunting, fishing, Hemingway stuff would be there, but the short stories and the early ones were kind of the original influence.
Hmm.
When I thought originally when I got into this, I thought I'd be writing a lot of kind of hunting and fishing related things. I ended up doing that, but not exclusively. Um, from the alcohol side, I got interested in Bukowski. And so, and that's kind of where some of the maybe more gritty side of my writing came in originally. And then Jim Harrison,
Yeah,
the big three that I came in with. So what were you going to guess?
all three of those.
Okay.
Honest to goodness, I've got it written down over here. Um,
Well,
because I mean, so we're going to talk about your Hemingway short story here in a minute. That was the finalist in the Hemingway short story competition. One Last Drop, which I really like that story. It's that's all through there. When I
yeah,
read that it was, I got big Indian camp vibes when I was reading that story. And the fact that you weaved in a character named Papa into the story, like it was just I could say, okay, this guy's read Hemingway, this guy understands Hemingway, and then you've got so many that I read that are tied into, like you said, hunting and fishing. Like so, I
right.
read, like I said, I read Junk Fish, I read Chosen Ones, like those there's hunting that runs through all those stories, and it comes across in a way from a guy that's done it,
Right.
like it doesn't feel contrived, it doesn't feel like, I'm going to write a story about hunting today, but I've never been hunting, you know what I mean? So you can tell that you've read somebody that's hunted,
Right. Right.
especially with One Last Drop, which we can probably talk about. I mean, that is, from the first sentence I thought, okay, Hemingway's here. There's obviously a lot, because when we talked about, you were saying, you kind of self-taught yourself and you just read and read and picked up your influences there. How much Hemingway did you read early on to get that kind of ingrained in your style? Because the way you write is very the short, concise, poppy sentences.
Yeah, I read quite a bit. I've probably read most of it. And once I started writing, I went back. I read a lot of the novels, through college and young
Hmm.
adulthood, and more of the short stories, and some in college and some in high school. And then when I started writing again, I went back and reread the short stories,
Yeah.
and that was useful. The other thing that's kind of interesting is science writing has to be pretty concise, and so there
Hmm.
you're never very verbose in that. So
Yeah.
that was a style of writing that I'd kind of been doing, just in a boring way. So it wasn't that hard to emulate. And as a matter of fact, in the last year or so, I've kind of made a conscious effort to learn how to write longer sentences, to give some variety in there,
Hmm.
which kind of sounds probably silly for most people who write, but you get used to kind of one style, and it's hard to undo it.
It is. I write the same way you write. It's when I have to be florid or I feel like I need to throw in something pretty, for lack of a better word, I'll stumble over words because I think the way that I hear people talk where I live, they don't speak that way. We don't describe things in a way that kind of leads itself to writing, that way. The way people talk where I'm from are short, sharp, cranky sentences, for most of the time. So I'll let you talk about that story. Tell me kind of how you conceived it, about the contest, and a little bit about One Last Drop, because I think it's a good piece of work.
Well, thank you. Sure. So I should start by saying I actually fished at Great Slave Lake 2 summers ago,
Mhm.
and that's kind of the setting I use for that. Um, so, um, so the piece about the Indian village was actually based on the Indian village there, and it was a fly-in fishing camp, so it was fairly affluent clients, and you could really tell this kind of culture divide that was from one side of the bay to the other. Um, and then there was actually one guy at the camp was an older guy. Not that I'm a spring chicken, but he was probably like 80, and he
Mhm.
seemed to be there by himself. And I just so it just kind of at the time intrigued me. And I've been keeping hunting and fishing journals for 30 years, so I've got volumes of them. And I just went back and read kind of in that, and I noted that guy. Um, and there was an indigenous guy, a couple indigenous guides who lived in the village. And so I had some things to draw on, some
Mhm.
real experiences. And then it was just kind of crafting a story around that.
Yeah. I it I read it in, really quick, and then I read it again, and I thought I don't read a lot of stories 2 or 3 times, but I knew preparing for this, I thought this is a really great piece of work about somebody that understands what they're doing, and like I said, you could tell. I see why the Hemingway people chose it to be a finalist, because it's all there, and you did a really great job with that. So kudos on that one. That's a
Well,
wonderful story.
thank you. Thank
Uh,
you.
Um, Chosen Ones, that one appealed to me too, because I think it touches on a lot of stuff that I write about, um, and I could relate to the characters in that story. And some of the things that you write about there are really relevant to where I'm from and kind of the things that we deal with here. Do you see a lot of the issues that you wrote about in that story in California, or are you drawing on Ohio there, or where did the influence for that story come from?
So that's a little bit of both. That was actually a creative nonfiction story.
Mhm.
It was my nephew was the kind of the younger person in the story, and it was one of those deals. He moved all over the country. His dad was in the Navy, and there was a lot of kind of turmoil, and dad was absent a lot. So I kind of became the pseudo adult for him, parental older brother slash father figure. Um, and then the hunting influences. I hunted a lot in Ohio, and then I've hunted all over the West. And there's different traditions, but
Mhm.
the issues and the cultures around hunting and fishing aren't all that different. And so I think there's a universal there that I
Yeah.
was trying to tap into.
Well, another one that, and like I said, I read 4 or 5 years. I've just got, we could talk about all of them, but I've got the three, um, that I thought we could, kind of expound on the most here. The other one was Roadkill. Um, and, I mean, the scourge of meth, and is that an issue there? Is that, I mean,
Yeah, so that's an issue in both places.
yeah.
When I was in college out here, undergrad, meth really started about 50 miles from my house.
Okay.
Before it moved across the country, this was kind of the meth capital. And then I live on the border, which adds another
Yeah.
dynamic. We've got it coming in both directions, and it's still an issue here. I have relatives who are addicted to meth. Have them to my house, and it's they've been struggling with it for years. So
Yeah.
Um, in Ohio, it was interesting. The first time I was there, meth was an issue. The second time I was there was during the oxy epidemic, the kind of
Yeah.
at the height of it. And I hunted a lot in Southeast Ohio and kind of befriended several families down there over the years I was there. And I knew a guy that I hunted with who two of his kids died in the years I knew him. It's
Mhm.
just so th- meth started coming in there a little bit after, but mostly it's heroin in that, at least in
Yeah.
that part of the state. So
It's I think Oxy laid the table for a lot of that,
right,
because you're always chasing. You're never going to catch up.
right,
And
right.
that's the sad thing about it. Uh, all of that said, all of those stories, and I don't like to label people. I don't like to put labels on people's writing, but there's a gritty side to what you do. All of your influences had kind of a gritty side to them. So I want to talk about. You even mentioned Bukowski, if we want to bring poetry into this, because the epigram to my novel is a Bukowski quote. I just think he lends himself to so
Yeah.
much of that style of writing. Um, he You actually wrote a piece on that where you went to the bars, and traveled
Yeah.
around and
Yeah.
kind of chased him around town, which I thought was a really cool piece too.
Yeah.
So dirty realism or grit lit, whatever you want to call that. Is there something there that pulls you there? Is it what you do naturally, or how did you wind up with the rest of us misfits in this world?
Yeah, that's a great question because I think when I came into this, I thought I'd write more kind of literary
Mhm.
style hunting and fishing pieces, and then maybe some satire. Um, and I sucked at satire. I figured that out really quick. And then the as I got into some of the stories that I've kind of had some background in, either through my work or people that I associate with over the years, or things that I've personally been involved in, whatever. There was a gritty side to it that just kind of was just under the surface, and I found it easier to write about it, and it felt more natural to write about it. And
Yeah.
I think a lot of these, and I think you mentioned this in your first episode, but a lot of those stories don't get told in a honest way. People
Hmm.
get kind of pigeonholed, and
Yeah.
so when I write these things, I'm trying to make sure it's not a caricature or it's moralistic, but it's actually just reflects the complexity and the truth of the situation.
Yeah, 100%. And then here's the other thing you run into too, which I ran into this. I got a rejection yesterday on a story that I was really, really proud of. And I think the story does what I want it to do. Um, but what we run into is that there aren't enough places to place that kind of work.
Yeah,
There are a couple, um, but if you try to place it outside of that, you have a hard time with it because of the violence, because of the drugs, because of the sex, because of, just suicide, whatever you want to put in there. And
right,
this story, unfortunately, had all those things.
right,
And you get it back. This is a well written piece. We like this piece, but we're afraid it's too violent for what we do.
right,
And you kind of want to say, I mean, it doesn't upset me. Like that doesn't upset me because I understand. But again, the thing that we just talked about is that's reality.
right,
Like that is like I know those people. You know those people,
right,
and you've seen these things. You've seen these things happen, and that makes it tough because on one hand, you love the people that take your work, but you
right,
don't want to flood them either.
right,
So um, I kind of file them away. If I feel it's a good piece, I'll stick it in a file under finished short stories. And, if you ever want to collect them one day and put them out, at least they're there.
right,
But
right.
yeah, I can't just send everything to the same publisher over and over.
Yeah, no, I get it. It's I was not knowing kind of the lay of the land. I'd ask other writers who wrote similar things, and they'd go, "Oh, you're getting the same thing. There's really not a lot of places to go, or try this one and try that one." It's interesting, and I'd be interested in your take, but like I've met some of the kind of people that are labeled as crime writers out here,
Hmm.
but it's really kind of the same thing. They're just, it's kind of this grit, crime, whatever. It's not like the old school detective
Right.
kind of thing. So
I think it's having a moment.
yeah.
It really is. There's a guy here in Arkansas, Eli Craner, who wrote "Don't Know Tough," which won the Edgar Award. I've talked to him on multiple occasions. He's a good dude. He's been real helpful to me. But it's the same story. He sent that book out. I think he said 200 times, 200 rejections, and then it wins an Edgar Award. You
Yeah.
know, so I mean, there are. I don't want to say people are gatekeeping you out if they perceive you to be a certain way or you only write a certain thing. But I think there's not the open mindedness to it. And maybe
Right.
with all this work coming out with S.A. Cosby and Eli and some of the stuff Ace Atkins does and it, Tom Franklin and Michael Ferris Smith, those guys, I mean, that's gritty writing and it's not really regional. They're writing about places just not in the South. There's gritty stuff that happens in California. There's gritty
Sure.
stuff that happens in Australia. There's gritty stuff happening everywhere. And I think if there was um, I think dirty realism is a good name for it.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
that term that was coined, I think 83 or so, but it needs more outlets. Really does. Good quality outlets more than the couple that we have right now. And maybe an award or two. The
Right.
mystery writers have their award. The crime writers have their awards. I think Pithead Chapel does a Larry Brown award every year, but he's kind of the patron saint of what we do. But
Right.
it would be cool if there were more recognition for the people that really did this well and are doing it well now.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of amazing too if you think of the sheer number of journals out there, that there's really
Mhm.
just this kind of handful that focus on that.
There, there's a journal for everything except for like the ones we want more of. That's a terrible
Yeah,
thing to say. I don't mean to any disrespect to anybody that writes anything else, because that's your passion, you go for it. But I mean, a lot of genres have a lot more outlets,
yeah,
because
yeah,
we're not, like you said, we're not really writing crime and we're
right,
not really writing mystery or a thriller, but it's all
yeah,
three of those things wrapped up in one.
right,
So you kind of get. I identify like you a little more with the crime guys.
right, yeah,
I think those stories tell kind of the same.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Matt Phillips out here is local in San Diego, and I think he's got 5 or 6 books. But when you read his stuff, it's just kind of grit lit, but it's set in the desert, the
Hmm.
Southern
Hmm.
California desert. And it's just so you could see it. But he's kind of been, he's got the crime writer moniker stuck to him. So
Yeah,
just an interesting thing.
yeah, and that's why I said earlier I don't really like to label people,
Yeah.
because you don't ever want to pigeonhole
Right.
anybody. Oh, well, that's what he does. Because like you, when I started, I read so much Vonnegut, like I could almost like just quote it.
Right.
And I wanted to do the whole, intelligent satire thing and still be funny. Um, and I wrote a couple, but I
Yeah.
wouldn't say they were great. And then just one day something happens, and then we've talked about this before on here, that write what you know thing. That's true to a point. You can write what you know, but you can also draw on the people around you, and it still be true. Um, so I mean that's helpful. You touched on something earlier though that I want to kind of circle back to about academic writing. Did you find, because I did you find that you missed writing about people, or that
Yeah.
people were the main driver of the story? Because I did ag history, so it was all like about rice and irrigation, and
Right.
I just missed people. I
Yeah.
missed relationships and stories.
Yeah, and it was even, I think, for what I was doing, where I was using statistics to kind of tell the aggregate story of all the suffering.
Hmm.
It kind of it started to drive me crazy after a while. It was just like, people would look at it, and when it's a number or a graph or a chart or an equation, it's easy to kind of look at it objectively and say, well, that's interesting, or it becomes abstract, and you lose that, no, these are real people with that are experiencing these problems. um, and then the stories are not, they're not something that you can throw into a bucket and say they're all this homogenous thing. There's variation in those stories, and you miss all that
Hmm.
in science. I mean, people try to get at it through qualitative research, and I've done some of that. That was closer to this type of writing, but still you're limited by methodological concerns and that sort of thing. So I did miss it.
Yeah. I'm academics right now in the academy. Is there still, are we still dealing with, because creative writing's a humanity too. Let's just lump it all into the humanities there. Is there still, are we still going through the death of the humanities? Has that kind of not solved itself, but has it kind of leveled off, or are we still on a downward trend?
Yeah, I think it largely depends on what type of school. I think we're always gonna have small liberal arts schools where the humanities and the arts will be alive, and there'll be a
Mhm.
much better balance between science and STEM things and everything else. I think in the large research institutes, um, or institutions, we're getting to a place where it's going to be mostly STEM. It's going to be you know AI stuff, big data. I mean, it just seems like
Mhm.
it's going. If there's not a market for the students, they're going to be reluctant to offer it.
Yeah.
So it's unfortunate. I don't think it'll be super quick. I think you'll see that the worst of it will be in public schools, public universities.
Hmm.
Um, I think the big privates have deep enough pockets to kind of, like at USC, they'll never get rid of the humanities, but there's already great disparities between the humanities in terms of you know everything from salaries to perks to
Right.
and so you can see what they invest in is not that.
Mm. See, I was non-traditional. First time I went to college, I flamed out like a nickel bottle rocket. I mean, I was in and out, man. I majored in McDonald's really the first semester, and yeah, I was had 7 years in the wilderness, and then went back and had decided, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I want to be a history teacher, right? I want to major in English. I want to be a history professor, and did well in school. Second time around, I was on probation for 2 semesters, trying to get all those F's back up to
Sure, sure.
to A levels, and was proud that I did that. And then at the end, I knew, okay, this is the path I want to follow. So I applied for Mississippi State had a master's to PhD. Right, you could do it all in
Right.
one track, and they just accepted you straight into the PhD program. And I was lucky enough to get in there, and I got a couple fellowships, and I was like over the moon. And like, you're moving down there, you're so excited, and you're like, all right, I'm living the dream. You're going to be a TA, and feel like you're working. And we had a meeting the first day. Now, I won't throw this professor under the bus because I love him, but we went over and we met him, and he set us down on a couch. He's like, "All right, guys," he said, "Well, I'm going to give you my 3-word speech that I give every grad student that comes in here." And he said, "Don't do it." He said, "The jobs aren't there. The
Yeah,
money's not there." He said, "You
yeah,
can probably make more money teaching high school." He said, if you love it and you've got a passion for research, then this is definitely for you." But he said, "I can't promise you you're going to get a job."
yeah,
And you want to talk about like rip your guts out, you know.
yeah,
And I think from that moment was when I started talking, "Well, what can I do with this minor?"
yeah,
What can I do there? And yeah, um, that's not why I left. I would have stuck it out. We had some family medical stuff that had to be dealt with, but uh, it's that all things happen for a reason thing, I think,
yeah, yeah.
because that forced me to focus on the writing side of things. And even that didn't come easy.
Right.
But um, all that said, I think that background with writing and that background with research and that background with understanding cause and effect and place and voice and heritage and all those things really plays into your writing and helps you make what you do good, right? Quote unquote good work. So I mean, have you found that? Like, I think you've probably had way more experience there than I have. You'd be exposed to, especially with what you focus on, you'd be exposed to all level of humanity there, and you'd be your well is probably pretty deep.
Yeah, yeah. It is, and it's the last several years I've kind of focused on drinking events, or so how people drink in real time in my
Hmm.
research. And if you think about that, it's very it's really about the interaction between people and the place they're in. And so I've kind of came into this with that framework, and that's kind of the way I just think about the world. That when things happen, um, there's usually a bunch of factors like right under the surface or right around somebody that makes that happen, and it doesn't makes it a little bit easier when I'm writing to put someone in a situation where okay, this would be the trigger of that. Um, and it's just because I literally spent years trying to figure that out for drinking. Um, and then to your point on academia, I tell my students basically this. I was probably the last generation. I got my PhD in 1995. I'm probably the last generation of true tenured professors that had a decent career with
Hmm.
adequate support, salaries, teaching loads, all those things. Now it's I tell myself I even stopped taking students a few years ago because I just didn't ethically think it made any sense.
Hmm.
There's not going to be jobs and that's across academia.
Yeah.
Um,
I've got an interesting alcohol story. I'll let you psychoanalyze here. So when I when I started doing this, I mean, this story like really like kind of kicked me in the guts, but it was a learning experience. I'd got I hit a vein of form a couple years ago where like I published like 5 or 6 things, just boom, placed them, boom, boom, boom,
yeah,
boom, boom, and was feeling good about it. And all that happened in the space of a year. So for writers, that's a pretty good year. You know,
right,
if you're doing something every other month with the amount of rejections we all get,
yeah,
you can feel good about that. And I was feeling pretty top shelf. And we went to Oxford, Mississippi, and I went in Square Books. I bought a signed first edition Larry Brown Dirty Work, got On Fire, and we went across the street and we ate at a place called Beret. And it had a veranda outside. We were sitting on that, and as luck would have it, there was a fire alarm across the street. Right. So here comes the Oxford Fire Department pulling up with this Oxford fire truck. And here I've bought On Fire by Larry Brown, his memoir. And I'm thinking, fuck me, the world's pretty good right now. So I took a
yeah,
picture. My wife held it up. And we took a picture of it. And I thought, well, what a red letter day. So we decided we would walk across the street and go to City Grocery where Larry drank. And which is a big thing. That's like going to Graceland for
right,
Elvis,
yeah,
So I'm up there, and then I got wide eyed, right? So I go in there, and I'm like, I wonder where Larry sat. Like, I wonder where his spot was. So we sat in there, and we just chilled out for a long time. But as the night went, uh, so did the Manhattans,
yeah,
and they will sneak up on you,
yeah,
and because they don't taste like alcohol for one
right,
thing, and they're a little smoother than a old fashioned, and I was just enjoying the hell out of them. And I was sitting at the end of the bar, and the bartender was a hell of a guy. He was taking care of us. And at some point I reached a point to where the world disappeared and knocked a drink over, and it was almost like this part of me was like, you're not ready. Like
yeah,
here you are, you're sitting in your hero's place, and you think you've done all this good stuff, and then you're spilling drinks. Like
yeah,
that was kind of an eye opener, and I think that grounded me a little bit. It kind of got me
yeah.
back to, this isn't easy. Like you had a lucky streak, and later on that night I went and like talked to Faulkner at his grave for a while. So it was as far as alcohol and riding, there you go. But that was a surreal experience. But yeah, that I've always, whenever I feel like okay, things are going great, I always think back to that moment. And I don't know if that was Larry from the great beyond saying, "Hey, bud, you know,
Yeah,
don't," because it is hard. And I mean, and I do too. Until I got in an MFA, I was teaching myself too. And
yeah,
it is amazing that he did what he did just by reading and just hammering a typewriter.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
there, have you ever seen that documentary, The Rough South of Larry Brown?
No, I haven't.
It's really worth your time.
Okay.
The amount of rejections that he got, and just the way it just kicked him in the stomach every time, but it just made him harder. It made him go out there and pound the typewriter more. Like I, that was almost like superhero stuff to me.
Yeah,
Just because my dad was a firefighter, Larry was a firefighter, and I just sat there and thought to myself, I can't see my dad doing this. You
yeah,
know, so I got a lot of respect for that. That's a heck of a talent to have, to not know that you had until you were, golly, I think he was 30ish, almost 30.
yeah,
So I mean,
yeah,
yeah. Now I feel like I'm getting a late start. I mean, I'm 44,
yeah,
and probably, I didn't write anything that I thought was good until I was 41. You know.
yeah. Well, I can relate. I mean, I don't think I really creative writing wise, I didn't start till I was 58. So
Mm,
but like I said, I think not having at least a career where you had to write all the time,
yeah.
even if it wasn't that helped.
Was there somebody or a moment where you thought, "Yep, I'm gonna do that now"?
Yeah, I think it started with COVID a little bit. Ironically, I didn't do it then. But I mean, I got to a point in my academic career that I read so much and wrote so much grants and journal articles for scientific papers. And I'd come home at night and I'd read nonfiction that was somehow related to my work. I'd completely lost the joy of reading, even.
Yeah,
So during
yeah.
COVID, I started getting back to like, I'm going to go back and start reading fiction again. And then I kind of rediscovered that. And then I was like, now I'm getting to the point, like I'm fed up with my career. Uh, without going into a bunch of long stories, USC, University of Southern California, not South Carolina, has had a ton
It's
of
the only one,
scandals.
let's be honest. That's the only one. They can, I don't know what they're doing over there.
Uh, but yeah, but they've had all these scandals, and I ended up being a whistleblower. I was the vice dean in a school, and I ended up being a whistleblower on a federal case. And it just kind of, I got to the point like that part of my life is going out. I'm still want to do something. I've always wanted to do something creative. Always wanted to write. Um, so now's the time to try it. And
Yeah,
so that's kind of just what happened. And then I just threw myself into it.
yeah.
So
Do you, in, in your profile picture on your Twitter, are you wearing a Lucero shirt?
yeah, they're my favorite band.
Man, it's unbelievable how many dudes are into Lucero that do this kind of writing.
Yeah.
uh, Justin Lee told me that on what's going to be in episode 2. We talked about Lucero, and God, man, I remember the Attic tapes, like when that
Oh
thing was
yeah.
getting
Yeah.
bootlegged around. Because I mean, Memphis is just 40 minutes from my front door.
Yeah.
Of
Yeah.
course, Ben's from Arkansas, so I mean that. God, I've known Lucero since they kind of came on the scene. So that's how did you find them?
Well, they tour constantly.
Relentlessly.
And so they come through San Diego every year, sometimes twice.
Mhm.
And just a friend of mine years ago was like, "Hey, you'd like this band?" I like drive-by truckers and other kind of
Yeah.
similar bands, and so we went to see them at a tiny little club, and I loved it. It was just so much fun, great show, and so I've probably seen them 30 times over the
Yeah.
years. And it's
I
and
think
then he moved.
the smaller the venue, the better
Oh yeah, for
with
sure.
them. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Here it's almost too big now. They're playing in a place that's about 500 people. In
Yeah.
LA, it was terrible. They played in a place with like 2,000 people, and it was
Yep.
just, yeah, it was just not even a good show.
Yeah.
Um, but uh, but I think Ben Nichols moved to Ohio now, and he lives pretty close to where I like 40 minutes from where I lived when I was in
Okay.
Ohio, which is interesting.
He did a thing. It would have been around 2011, 2012. Maybe no, it was earlier than that. It would have been 6 or 7 where he'd read Blood Meridian
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
did that, I don't wanna call it a tribute album, but it was kind of a, concept
Yeah, it was a
thing that he did.
EP, yeah.
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 I mean, he he's a fascinating dude.
Yeah, his brother's the Jeff Nichols, the film director,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
they're, ta talk about a talented family. But
yeah.
somewhere on YouTube, there's a Ben Nichols at some book reading that's in a brewery where he's reading Blood Meridian and then performing the songs.
Oh, yeah?
It's really cool if you can find it.
Does he
Yeah.
read it in the Ben Nichols voice?
Yeah. Yeah, pretty much. That's
See the child.
yeah. Exactly. A lot of whiskey and a lot of
Yeah.
cigarettes.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. We there was always a joke. Somebody'd always we were talking about you listen to Lucille. Yeah, man, I listen to Ben Nichols. But every time we see them, I always ask my wife, I'm like, is he still gonna have a voice?
Yeah.
Because that's got to be so hard to sing the way that he sings. But he doesn't talk much different than the way
Yeah.
that he sings either.
Yeah.
But they're probably the most down to earth band I think
Yeah,
I've
for
ever
sure.
ran into. Like you can just go. I don't know what your experience has been, but you just walk up, talk to them,
Oh,
you
yeah.
know,
Yeah.
and you'll see them out at, especially if you see them in Memphis. We've gone out to eat before shows, and they've been there eating before they ever played the show. So you feel
Yeah.
like you've seen them before you've seen them.
Yeah.
But I found that so intriguing that like so many of us are into the same music. And what's funny about that music is it's about the same stuff we're writing about, really.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think
Totally.
all that feeds into the funnel because I don't know if you do it. I don't because I have to have total silence to write. But some people will listen to music or they'll create a Spotify playlist or something that they've got going in the background. And I think Drive By Truckers, Jason Isbell, Lucero, Tyler Childers, that kind of music, even Trampled by Turtles a little bit.
Sure. Yep.
They all creep kind of into my sphere. I'm it. I mean, and Nickel Creek, like I listen to all kinds of like bluegrassy Americana stuff.
Yep.
You
Yep.
know, um, I'll give you one. I don't know if you'll be into it or not, but I stumbled across um, Waxahachie.
I don't think so.
Yeah, not bad. Um, they're not bad. I can't remember the name of the song that's out right now, but I can't get it out of my head. Isn't that funny how you can remember the lyrics, but you can't remember the name of a song?
Yeah,
Uh,
totally.
right back to it. That's the name of
Okay.
the song. And it is the video is very Southern Gothic. They're on a flat bottom pontoon boat, just her and a guy playing a guitar, and she's got her back to the direction of travel, and it's kind of shot that way. It's really kind of a haunting video. It's a really good song. Um, but yeah, that they're probably top of my list right now as to what I'm into. But it's all that same thing. Like they're all singing about what we're writing about. I
Yeah.
think that's
Yeah.
super cool. With let's kind of get off a song and go back to poetry for a minute because I find that like really really intriguing. Like I said, I think my cousin's a superhero as far as that goes. What for people that aren't into poetry? What does JD Clapp think makes good poetry?
That's a good question because I'll preface this by saying I academically I almost know nothing about poetry.
Mhm, mhm,
So,
mhm.
for me,
I can't
it's
even speak the language. It's a completely different language than what I speak with meter and rhyme and scansion and all of that.
yeah, yeah, and that's it's intimidating. That's why I was like, I'm never going to be a poet. I'm never going to mess around with that. But I think at least the ones that I like to read. and write are ring true. So, and they're usually not about me. Um, so they're it's kind of something I've observed in the world. Like I did one about a guy that collects cans that I put up on Poverty House last week. To me, and those harbor ones you were talking about
Hmm.
earlier,
Hmm.
um, those are about kind of things I've observed in San Diego around me that struck a nerve.
Yeah.
Either as an injustice or an irony between, you got this $1 million yacht and some guy on a sailboat that's decrepit and he's pissing over the side while
Yeah.
$1 million boats going by. Um, so that it has to have some realism in it, uh, for me to enjoy it. But
Yeah. I, Greg's last book was, it's called A Horse with Holes in It. And a lot of it was about our family. And I think that's probably my favorite book because I can connect to it because that is real to
yeah,
me. The poets that I read do tend to write more about the area I'm from, the things that I understand. And I love Dylan Thomas. Like, I mean,
yeah,
we can go that way too, but
sure,
it's, I think it just has to ring true to you, whatever that is, whatever poet John Berryman. I love John Berryman too.
you're right,
Uh, but that's the style of poetry. It's even that is kind of raw and emotional style
right,
poetry too. And I just think you're like you say, if it's real, people will read it,
yeah,
and I think they'll come closer to connecting to it. And the way we were talking earlier about craft, I, the human imagination these days is not really, and the attention span is not really geared toward long descriptive writing. And I think if you're going to hold an audience, short, sharp, to the point is the way to go right now. And if we can get other people to believe that, I think it'll be a happier world for us as writers. But I think we get more people reading.
oh, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, the statistics are just scary when you look at them.
Yeah,
So
frightening, man. I mean,
yeah,
I work in the public school system. It's terrifying every day.
oh yeah, I
I
can
mean,
imagine. Yeah,
yeah, just getting them excited about a book because when you do, then you've got unicorns, right? You're
yeah,
like, oh, that kid, I'm watching that kid,
yeah,
because that
yeah,
kid's going to do something. Um, because it's so rare now to get a kid that carries a book around, you
yeah.
know, and I'm probably on a college campus too.
Oh, for
Um,
sure. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
everybody's got their head buried in a phone.
Or
Um,
that even can write longhand anymore. I mean, it's.
Hell, write an email.
I know, I
I mean,
know.
how many emails do you get that start with "Hey"?
Yeah,
You know,
all of them, all the
no,
hijacks
no,
are
doctor
done.
so and so, no professor so and
Yeah,
so. Hey, I had a girl email me as a TA. Uh, Funny, I'll tell you two funny things. Same girl. Um, First one started, "What's up, Dan?" Okay, that was the first one, and then she turned in a term paper about Chester A. Arthur, and she called him Chet throughout the whole paper. And I was like, we usually refer to presidents by their Christian name or their surname. We don't really roll with nicknames. I said, unless you're on a first name basis with quote unquote Chet, I wouldn't roll with Chet Arthur. But that cracked me up. I've told that story 100 times. She'll never listen to this, and I didn't name her. So, but still, that's one to be proud of.
yeah.
All right, so we'll do the last two because I've almost kept you an hour. We'll do the obligatory. Who are you inviting for dinner, and what are you going to serve? If you could invite
Okay,
three riders to dinner, I mean,
okay.
you got to invite Jim, don't you? Because he is like the culinary
Yes,
monster.
yeah, yeah. I would, and I'll go. Even though I'm from Ohio, I'll go with a Michigan theme here. So I'd say Jim Harrison, Hemingway, who wasn't from Michigan but spent a lot of time there,
Yeah, near enough.
and Bonnie Joe Campbell.
Okay, not familiar with Bonnie Joe Campbell.
Yeah,
Um,
so you should. You read. I'll send you some stuff, but
yeah, okay,
it's very it's rural. It's gritty. Tends to be very strong female characters.
yeah,
So you'd like it. And
guaranteed.
Michigan based.
We go
And then
there.
to eat. some sort of. I used to have kill it and grill it parties where
Hmm.
I'd serve stuff that I hunted, fished, and grew in the garden in one meal. So I'd do something like that.
Oh, that'd be cool. Kind of farm to table thing, but woods
Yeah.
to table. We've been going to Michigan on summer vacation for about 6, 7 years now, to Holland, and we'll go to the state park, and because the beach up there is not, swamp ass hot like it is down here.
Right. Right.
When we'll go up there, and we do this very southern thing when we get there, because everybody will be going on, oh, it's hot up here, and you're just sitting there, isn't that precious? You know, because it's like 110 degrees and humid down here. But golly, when you get up there and you got those long nights, and
Yeah.
it's beautiful, and the grass is so just, I don't know. I like everything about Michigan. Ohio too. My wife loves Ohio. We were going to Boston for our honeymoon, and we drove through pretty much all of Ohio. We stayed in Cincinnati, which was kind of halfway, and then
Right.
we went on up, and some of the nicest people I ever met were in Ohio. Just really, really cool state. So it's a shame they hate each other because I like both places.
Yeah. It's all about football.
Yeah,
So.
that's going to be worse next year
Oh
now.
yeah.
My
Yeah.
goodness. So, all right. So, what have you got going right now? What are you working on?
Right now, I did a novella in Flash.
Hmm.
That was the kind of main story was the story I just had in the Cowboy Jamboree's last issue, and
Hmm.
then but it split it up. So it's about Southern Ohio and kind of the folks I met down there that I talked about earlier in the thing, and then I'm trying to get enough other stories for a collection, and then I think sometime this year I'll probably try to tackle a novel.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I'm doing now.
I'm in that weird in between phase where I'm going to finish a novel in the next week. And that seems to be when I want to write short stories. Because, like I said earlier, I can't do the two at the same time.
Right, right.
So I've got like 3 or 4 ideas I'll probably kick around, but I'm in betwixt at the moment.
Yeah.
But, well, you got any idea of what the novel's going to be, or
Um,
any inside baseball for us?
I have a couple competing ideas, and
Yeah.
they're pretty different. One deals with a criminal taxidermist. Um,
Excellent. Excellent.
yes, and the other one's more kind of straightforward organized crime story. So,
Oh, I look
which
forward
would
to
be
that.
different for me, but
Yeah.
it I grew up Catholic, and I had people that were priests and nuns in my extended family, and on one side of the family's Italian, so I have kind of a lot of interesting relationships between religion
Yeah.
and the mafia that I could explore.
Yeah. No, you're the guy to write that story then. That's going to be
Yeah.
good. I look forward to that. All right, man. Well, I've kept you for an hour and I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's been a
Like,
lot of fun. I
yeah.
appreciate you having me on, and
Tell everybody where they can find you on Twitter. I forgot your handle like off the top of my head. Is it JD
yeah, it's
Clapp Writes?
at JD Clapp Writes.
Yeah.
So
So I did
it's
pull it
pretty
out.
straightforward. Yep.
And you're nice enough to interact with pretty well anybody that'll throw a bone out there. Like that's how we got to know each other, just
Yep.
through, threads. And I don't think people understand how welcoming that community is. If you'll just put yourself out there,
I
there's
was
lots of
shocked. I
folks.
mean,
Yeah.
I've never, it's great. I mean, everything changed when I got on Twitter.
Hmm.
As far as meeting new people, it just rippled, including people that live 5 miles from me, you
Yeah.
know?
Well,
So,
the thing about Twitter is if you can wade through the cesspool to your good corner
yeah, yeah,
and live there,
yeah,
you're probably okay, because I think we've got a pretty good corner of it, as far
yeah,
as
I
pretty
agree.
respectful and supportive, and it's been good to me. So yeah, if you do want to talk to either one of us, I would suggest just holler at us because we'll
Yeah,
both reply. I know you will. I know I will. So
yep.
that's how you build things anyway.
Well, if
So
we're ever in the same part of the world, buy you a drink and
yeah,
listen to some Lucero.
I think
So,
we can do it. It would go hand in hand. All right,
Absolutely.
JD. Thank you,
All right.
sir, for joining me. I
All right.
appreciate
Talk
it,
to you later,
brother.
Dan.
All right.
Bye.
Talk to you later. Bye bye.